Chapter 1. The Perfect Family's Park. "Mommy, why is that stinky man in our park?" The voice cut through the peaceful afternoon like a knife. Emma Richardson, 7 years old, stood pointing directly at the old man on the bench. Her blonde hair was pulled into perfect pigtails with pink ribbons. Her designer dress cost more than his monthly VA check. A plastic tiara sat crooked on her head, catching the sunlight. Robert Chen didn't look up. He kept his eyes on the pigeons at his feet, his trembling hands tossing breadcrumbs from a paper bag. The shaking never stopped, not even in his sleep. Hadn't stopped since Vietnam. Her mother, Melissa, laughed nervously and put a manicured hand over Emma's mouth. "Sweetie, we don't point. It's not polite." She didn't say what Emma said was wrong. She didn't correct the cruelty, just the delivery. Richard Richardson, Emma's father, stood tall in his polo shirt and expensive sunglasses. He glanced at Robert with the kind of look you give to litter on the sidewalk. "Some people just don't try hard enough," he muttered, loud enough for his wife to hear. "If you want something in life, you work for it. Simple as that." Robert heard every word. He'd learned to hear everything while appearing to hear nothing. Survival skill. 65 years old, and he still couldn't escape the battlefield. His jacket was military green, faded and worn with patches sewn over holes. His boots held together with duct tape, but his face was clean-shaven, his hair neatly combed. He maintained what dignity he could. The pigeons cooed softly, trusting him. They were his only friends here. Emma tilted her head, studying him like an animal at the zoo. Her bright blue eyes held no malice. Not really. She simply didn't know any better. But ignorance, Robert had learned, could hurt just as much as hate. The spring sun painted everything gold at Riverside Park. Children's laughter echoed through the air. Families spread colorful blankets across the grass. The smell of freshly cut grass mixed with cotton candy from a nearby vendor. A perfect Sunday afternoon. And in the corner near the weathered benches the city had forgotten to replace, a forgotten veteran sat alone, feeding pigeons, pretending not to hear a little girl ask why he existed. Chapter 2. Innocence Corrupted. Emma waited until her parents were distracted, talking to another wealthy couple about their upcoming vacation to Tuscany. Then, like a cat drawn to something that moves, she wandered toward Robert. Her pink shoes crunched on gravel as she approached. Robert's body tensed. He recognized that walk, the confident stride of someone who'd never been told no, never been denied anything, never learned that other people have feelings that matter. "Hey," Emma said, standing directly in front of him now, blocking his view of the pigeons. "Hey, mister, are you sleeping?" Robert slowly raised his eyes. Up close, she was even younger than he'd thought. Just a baby, really. Her face still had that roundness of early childhood. "No, miss," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "Just feeding the birds." "Why?" Emma wrinkled her nose. "Birds are dirty. They poop everywhere. My daddy says homeless people are dirty too. Do you poop everywhere?" The words hit like a slap, but Robert had learned long ago not to react. He'd survived mortar fire and burning vehicles. He could survive a child's cruelty. "No, miss," he repeated, turning back to his pigeons. But Emma wasn't done. She kicked the paper bag at his feet, sending breadcrumbs scattering across the concrete. The pigeons scattered in a flutter of wings, their peaceful meal destroyed. "Oops!" Emma giggled, covering her mouth. "Butterfingers!" Robert closed his eyes, breathing slowly through his nose. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, the breathing technique his VA therapist taught him for the panic attacks, for the moments when the world became too much. "Emma Grace Richardson, what did I tell you about bothering people?" Melissa's voice carried across the park, but there was no real anger in it, just mild annoyance, the kind of tone you use when your child interrupts a phone call, not when they hurt someone. Emma grabbed a stick from the ground and poked Robert's arm. "Hello? Earth to homeless man, wake up!" "Emma," Melissa called again, louder now, but still not moving from her spot. Emma poked harder. "Are you deaf? My teacher says old people are deaf. She says they need hearing aids. Do you need—" Something fell from Robert's jacket pocket. A small metallic clink on concrete. Emma's eyes locked onto it immediately, the way children notice shiny things, treasures, prizes to be claimed. A medallion. Old, tarnished, hanging from a faded green ribbon. Emma dropped the stick and snatched it up. "Ooh, what's this? Is this real gold? It's mine now!" Robert's entire body went rigid. His eyes, which had been dull and distant, suddenly focused with an intensity that seemed to age him another 10 years. "No." The word came out as a broken whisper. "Please, no. Not that. Anything but that." He reached out with trembling hands, but his legs, damaged from years on hard streets and harder memories, gave out. He stumbled forward, falling to his knees. "Don't. Please, I'm begging you. That's all I have left." Emma stumbled backward, suddenly frightened by the desperation in his voice. She'd never heard an adult sound like that. Broken. Shattered. "Emma, get away from him." Richard Richardson appeared like thunder, running full speed. He grabbed Emma and pulled her behind him, then stepped forward and shoved Robert hard in the chest. Robert fell backward onto the concrete, his head hitting with a sickening thud. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Richard roared, standing over him. "You stay away from my daughter, you hear me? I will call the police. I will have you arrested." A small crowd had gathered now, parents pulling their children closer. Teenagers filming on phones, everyone watching, everyone judging. Robert lay on the ground, stunned, blood trickling from a cut on his scalp. But his eyes weren't on Richard. They were on Emma's hand, where the medallion dangled from her small fingers. "Please," he whispered one more time. "Let's go," Melissa said, pulling Emma away. "This park isn't safe anymore. I'm going to call the city council tomorrow. These people shouldn't be allowed—" "Wait, Daddy." He dropped something. But Emma's words were lost as her parents dragged her toward the parking lot. The medallion slipped from her fingers and fell into the grass, disappearing in the green blades. Robert dragged himself forward on his elbows, searching desperately with shaking hands. His breath came in ragged gasps. Tears streamed down his weathered face. The crowd dispersed, uncomfortable with the raw emotion, eager to return to their perfect Sunday. Finally, Robert's fingers closed around the medallion. He pulled it to his chest and curled into a ball, sobbing like a child. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the metal and ribbon. "I'm so sorry I haven't found him yet. I promised. But what Robert didn't know was that he'd just met the answer to his 30-year-old promise. And she'd just walked away. Chapter 3. The Weight of a Promise. Night fell heavy over the city. Robert sat in the corner of St. Vincent's Shelter for Veterans, on a thin cot with springs that poked through the mattress. Around him, 50 other men snored, coughed, muttered in their sleep. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and old coffee. But Robert wasn't sleeping. He never really slept. In his hands, he turned the medallion over and over, his calloused fingers tracing the engraved letters on the back. SGT Thomas Reid CR. Until we meet again. "You gonna stare at that thing all night again, Chen?" The voice came from the cot beside him. James Porter, 68, Vietnam veteran with one leg and more ghosts than anyone should carry. Robert didn't look up. "Can't lose it, James. It's all I've got. The only proof?" "Proof of what?" "That I kept someone alive long enough to matter." James shifted his weight, his cot creaking. He'd known Robert for 3 years now, since Robert first showed up at the shelter, eyes haunted, hands shaking, unable to hold down any job for more than a week. PTSD, the doctor said, survivor's guilt, chronic depression, a whole alphabet soup of diagnoses that basically meant broken beyond traditional fixing. "You ever gonna tell me the story behind that thing?" Robert's fingers stopped moving. For a long moment, he was silent. Then, slowly, he opened the medallion. Inside were 2 photos, protected behind scratched plastic. On the left, a newborn baby, pink and wrinkled, wrapped in a blue blanket. On the right, a young soldier, maybe 25, with a bright smile and eyes full of hope. "Kuwait," Robert finally said, his voice distant. "February 1991, Operation Desert Storm. The memory came back in pieces, the way they always did, never the whole picture, just fragments, sounds, smells, terror, the desert at night, cold, despite what everyone thinks, stars so bright they hurt to look at. The convoy of 5 vehicles heading back to base after a reconnaissance mission. Then, the explosion, the world turning orange and black. The lead vehicle flipping through the air like a toy, screaming, so much screaming. Robert remembered running toward the flames while everyone else ran away. His training overrode his survival instinct. His sergeant always said, "You run toward the danger, not from it. That's what makes you different. That's what makes you worth something." The vehicle was an inferno. The metal was melting. The ammunition inside was starting to cook off, small explosions like firecrackers, then bigger ones. But there were voices inside. 12 men. 12 human beings burning alive. Robert didn't think. If he'd thought, he would have died. He went in. Once, twice, 3 times, 4, each time dragging bodies through flames. His uniform caught fire, his hands blistered, his lungs filled with smoke. On his last trip, the one he almost didn't make, he found Thomas Reid Sr. pinned under a collapsed seat, unconscious. Robert pulled with strength he didn't know he had. Something in his back tore. Something in his shoulder separated. But he pulled. They made it out seconds before the ammunition reached critical mass, and the whole thing exploded into a fireball. 23 men. He saved 23 men that night. But Thomas died anyway. 2 days later, in the hospital tent. Internal injuries they couldn't fix. Not there. Not then. He called me over, Robert continued, his voice thick now. Right before the end. Could barely breathe. Blood in his lungs. He took off this medallion. His wife had given it to him before deployment. Their baby was only 3 months old. He'd never even held his son. Robert opened the medallion wider, showing James the photos. He put this in my hand, made me promise. Said, "Robert, my boy is going to grow up without me. He's going to wonder who I was. Promise me. Promise me you'll find him someday. Tell him his daddy loved him. Tell him his daddy was brave. Promise me he won't grow up thinking I abandoned him." Robert's voice broke. "I promised. I swear to God, I promised him." James stayed quiet, understanding the weight of what he was hearing. "That was 30 years ago," Robert whispered. "I've been looking for Thomas Reid Jr. for 30 years. Every database, every veterans registry, every social media platform. But the kid's mother remarried when he was young, changed their last name, moved states. I lost the trail 15 years ago." He closed the medallion carefully like it might shatter. "This morning, some little girl took it from me, and for 5 minutes I thought I'd broken my promise forever. I thought I'd failed him. Again." "But you got it back," James said gently. "Yeah," Robert nodded. "I got it back." He lay down on his cot, holding the medallion against his chest. "I just wish I knew how to find him," he whispered to the darkness. "I'm 65 years old, James. I'm running out of time. Thomas Reid Jr. is out there somewhere, and he deserves to know his father was a hero." What Robert didn't realize was that Thomas Reid Jr. had been standing 20 feet away from him that very afternoon, and had watched his own daughter humiliate the man who saved his father's life. Chapter 4. The Face in the Photograph. Monday morning arrived with rain. Robert walked back to Riverside Park despite the weather. It was the only place where the noise in his head got quieter, the only place where he could breathe. He sat on his usual bench, the one near the playground, feeding pigeons from a new bag of bread he'd bought with his last $3. The park was nearly empty now. Just a few joggers with umbrellas, a dog walker, and... Robert froze. There she was, Emma Richardson, wearing a yellow raincoat and matching boots, jumping in puddles near the playground, laughing, innocent, unaware of the pain she'd caused. Robert's first instinct was to leave, to avoid another confrontation, another humiliation. But then he saw the man approaching Emma from the parking lot. An older man, maybe 60, with gray hair and a kind face. He carried a large golf umbrella and called out, "Emma, slow down, sweetie. Grandpa can't run in this rain." Robert's world tilted. Grandpa. He stared at the man's face. Really stared. The shape of his jaw, the way he smiled, No, it couldn't be. Robert's hands trembled as he pulled out the medallion. He opened it with shaking fingers and looked at the photo on the left. The baby. The 3-month-old infant. Then he looked back at the man in the parking lot. Older now. Decades older. But the eyes. Those were the same eyes from the photo on the right. Thomas Reid Sr.'s eyes. "Oh my God," Robert whispered. The man, Thomas Reid Jr., swept Emma into his arms and spun her around. She squealed with delight, her earlier cruelty completely forgotten. "Grandpa, can we get ice cream?" "In the rain? You're crazy, kiddo." "Please, please, please, please." Robert stood up slowly, his legs weak. He took one step forward, then another. He had to know. He had to be sure. He got close enough to hear their conversation. "Daddy's coming to pick you up soon," Thomas Jr. said, setting Emma down. "Your dad is always late, though. Classic Richard." "Grandpa, why don't you have any pictures of your daddy?" The question stopped Thomas Jr. cold. His smile faded slightly. I told you, sweetheart. My father died before I was old enough to remember him, in the war. Was he brave? I don't know. I never got to find out. The sadness in his voice was palpable. Decades of wondering, decades of absence. The sadness in his voice was palpable. Decades of wondering, decades of absence. Robert's vision blurred with tears. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. A car pulled up. A sleek black BMW. Richard Richardson stepped out, saw Robert standing nearby, and his face immediately darkened. You, Richard growled, striding forward. I thought I told you to stay away from my family. Robert stumbled backward, but his eyes were still locked on Thomas Jr. I'm calling the police, Richard said, pulling out his phone. Dad, get Emma in the car. This man is stalking us. Wait. Robert finally found his voice. Please, just wait. You need to leave before I have you arrested. Thomas Jr. picked up Emma and started toward the car, giving Robert an apologetic look but not intervening. Robert's hand shot into his pocket. He pulled out the medallion and held it up, rain streaming down his face and mixing with tears. Thomas Reid, he shouted. Your father's name was Thomas Reid. He died in Kuwait in 1991. Everyone stopped. Thomas Jr. froze halfway to the car, Emma still in his arms. Richard's phone was at his ear, but he wasn't speaking. The rain pounded down, drowning out everything except Robert's ragged breathing. Thomas Jr. slowly turned around, his eyes wide. What did you just say? Robert held up the medallion, and in that moment, a 30-year promise was about to be fulfilled. Chapter 5. The Truth. No one knew. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt underwater. They sat in Richard's BMW in the parking lot. All four of them. Emma in her car seat, confused and quiet. Richard in the driver's seat, tense. Thomas Jr. in the passenger seat, holding the medallion like it might evaporate, and Robert in the back, soaking wet, still shaking. This was my father's, Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned the medallion over, reading the engraving on the back. His fingers traced each letter. I've never seen this before. She never showed me anything from his time in the service. Robert leaned forward, his voice urgent now. Your father was a hero? He saved lives? He died alone in a hospital tent, Thomas interrupted bitterly. That's all I know. That's all my mother ever told me. He went to war, and he didn't come back. She remarried when I was 4, to a man named Paul Richardson. He adopted me, changed my name. I became Thomas Richardson, erased my father like he never existed. Richard sat silent, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his jaw tight. I grew up angry, Thomas continued, his voice hardening. Angry at a father who chose war over his family, who left us, He didn't choose it, Robert said firmly. He was ordered, and he didn't leave you. He fought like hell to get back to you. Thomas turned in his seat, facing Robert fully now. His eyes, Thomas Sr.'s eyes, were filled with decades of pain. Then why did he die? Robert closed his eyes, the memory searing through him again, because I wasn't fast enough. The silence in the car was suffocating. February 26, 1991, Robert began, his voice mechanical, like he was reading from a report. Our convoy was ambushed. The lead vehicle took a direct hit, IED, rolled 3 times, caught fire, 12 men trapped inside. I pulled out 23 total from 3 different vehicles that night. Your father was the last one. He opened his eyes, looking directly at Thomas Jr. I got him out. He was alive. Conscious even. We got him to the medical tent. They said he'd be okay. Internal bruising, maybe a punctured lung, but treatable. Treatable. Robert's voice cracked. But there was shrapnel. Tiny pieces they missed in the initial exam. One of them shifted 2 days later, punctured his heart. He died within minutes. Thomas Jr.'s hands were shaking now, the medallion trembling. Before he died, he called me over. He could barely breathe, but he was desperate. He made me promise, made me swear that I would find you, that I would tell you who he was, that I would tell you he loved you, that he didn't abandon you. Robert pulled out a worn piece of paper from his jacket, a photocopy, handled so many times the edges were fraying. He wrote this, in the hospital, right before the end. He handed it to Thomas. Thomas unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was shaky, weak, but legible. To my son, Thomas Jr., if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home. I'm so sorry. I wanted to hold you. I wanted to teach you to ride a bike, to throw a baseball, to be a good man. There's a soldier named Robert Chen. He saved my life. If you ever meet him, know that you exist because he was brave when I couldn't be. I love you. I will always love you. Don't be angry. Live well. Be better than me. Dad. Thomas Jr. made a sound, something between a sob and a gasp. His entire body shook. Richard reached over, putting a hand on his father's shoulder, his own eyes red. Emma, from the back seat, spoke in a small voice. Grandpa? Why are you crying? Thomas Jr. turned, tears streaming down his face, and smiled at his granddaughter. A broken, beautiful smile. Because, sweetheart, I just met the man who saved my father's life, and yesterday you made fun of him. Emma's face crumpled. She looked at Robert, really looked at him, and for the first time saw him as a person. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know. I'm really, really sorry. Robert smiled gently. I know, little one. You didn't know. But Richard spoke up then, his voice tight with emotion. I did. Everyone turned to look at him. I knew, Richard repeated, his voice breaking. Not about you specifically, Robert, but I knew my father-in-law grew up without his dad. I knew it broke something in him, and I let that same brokenness infect me. I raised Emma to think that success meant stepping on people who have less. I taught her to mock weakness, because I was terrified of being weak myself. He turned to face Robert fully, tears running down his cheeks. My wife's father died alone, wondering if his son knew he was loved, and I almost repeated that cycle. I'm so sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry. The karma wasn't punishment. It was a mirror, showing them who they'd become and giving them one chance to change. Chapter 6. Breaking the Cycle. 3 months later. Riverside Park looked different in summer. Brighter, fuller, more alive. Robert sat on his usual bench, but everything else had changed. He wore clean clothes, jeans and a button-up shirt donated by the Richardson family. His hands still shook, but less now. The VA had finally approved his treatment plan. Therapy twice a week, medication for PTSD, and a caseworker helping him find permanent housing. But the biggest change was the people around him. Thomas Jr. visited every Sunday, bringing coffee and sitting for hours, listening to stories about his father, learning who Thomas Sr. had been, filling in the gaps of 30 years. Richard came on Wednesdays with Emma. They volunteered together at the new Veterans Center that the Richardson family had funded, using part of Richard's wealth to create a place where men like Robert could get help without shame. And Emma ran up to the bench now, out of breath, holding a piece of paper. Mr. Robert! Mr. Robert! Look what I made! She thrust the paper into his hands. It was a drawing, crude, the way 7-year-olds draw, but unmistakable. A man in a military uniform covered in medals, standing tall and proud. The word hero written in purple crayon at the top. It's you, Emma beamed. I told my whole class about you, about how you saved my great-grandpa. My teacher said you should get a medal. Robert's eyes filled with tears, but happy ones this time. He pulled Emma into a gentle hug. Thank you, sweetheart. This is the best medal I've ever gotten. Richard approached, carrying a folder. His expression was serious, but warm. Robert, I want to show you something. He opened the folder, revealing architectural plans. It's a transitional housing facility for veterans, 40 units, mental health services on site, job training programs, and I want to name it after him, the Thomas Reid Senior Memorial Home. Robert stared at the plans, his throat tight. You'd do that? It's what he would have wanted, Thomas Jr. said, walking up behind them, to help other soldiers, to make sure they don't fall through the cracks the way you almost did. He placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. You kept your promise. You found me. You told me who my father was. Now let us keep a promise to you. You'll never be forgotten. You'll never be invisible. You matter. Robert couldn't speak. He just nodded, tears streaming freely now. Emma tugged on his sleeve. Mr. Robert, are you happy crying or sad crying? He laughed through the tears. Happy crying, little one. Definitely happy crying. As the sun set over Riverside Park, the four of them sat together on that weathered bench. The veteran who kept a promise, the grandson who finally knew his father, the man who learned compassion, and the little girl who learned that people aren't disposable. The cycle was broken. Epilogue: The Real Karma. 1 year later. The camera focused on Emma Richardson, now 8 years old, standing in front of Riverside Park. She wore her school uniform and held a microphone nervously. Behind her, a bronze plaque had been mounted on Robert's bench. In memory of SGT, Robert Chen, U.S. Army, who taught us that heroes don't always wear capes. They sometimes sit on park benches, feeding pigeons, waiting for one more chance to keep a promise. Emma looked directly into the camera, her voice small but steady. I was a really mean kid. I said horrible things to Mr. Robert. I didn't know he was a hero. I didn't know he saved my great-grandfather's life. I just thought he was... nobody. She paused, her eyes glistening. But my dad taught me something. He said karma isn't about getting punished for being bad. It's about getting a chance to be better. Mr. Robert gave that chance to my great-grandpa. Then he gave it to my grandpa, then to my dad, and then to me. Behind her, Richard, Melissa, and Thomas Jr. stood together, arms around each other. Mr. Robert died last month, Emma continued, her voice breaking slightly. But before he died, he told me something. He said, Emma, you're going to grow up and forget this old soldier. But don't forget what you learned. People aren't trash just because they're broken. Sometimes the most broken people are the ones who saved everyone else first. She held up a photograph, the 4 of them on that bench one last time, Robert smiling at peace. This is karma, Emma said, looking at the camera with her great-grandfather's eyes. Not punishment, not revenge, just people choosing to be better than they were yesterday. She placed flowers on the bench, touched the bronze plaque gently, and walked away. The camera held on the empty bench as the sun set, pigeons gathering where Robert used to sit, waiting for breadcrumbs that would never come. But his promise, 30 years old, written in blood and tears and unwavering love, had finally been